What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing an oil change on my 2022 Yamaha R7. So I'm going to walk you guys through the process of how to do that, the tools that you need, torque specs and things like that. You can do this with very basic hand tools that most of you will have in your garage. So I'll show you how to do that, all the parts that you have to take apart to get to the oil filter and to the drain plug. And it's a pretty straightforward process, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Alrighty, so the next thing you need to do after you let the bike warm up for just a little bit is go ahead and get this side fairing off. Now this is the only one that you really have to take off in order to be able to get to everything. I usually end up taking this lower fairing piece off just so that I have more room and that I can use that opportunity to go ahead and clean it. But in order to take this side fairing off, it's pretty straightforward. You got four 4mm hex bolts, and then you have one push pin that's here on the inside for that inner part of the fairing. And then in order to connect the two down there, you have another push pin that typically has a Phillips head that you have to screw out in order to pop it out. So it's pretty straightforward. We'll go ahead and knock that out. Okay, and it does help if you have like a little pick or something like that. You can use the point of a screwdriver, but I like these little picks. They're just easy to get into places. You'll reach in there, push the center of that little push pin down to get it to unlock, and then you can usually grab it with your fingers and pop that out. That's it. And then for that lower one, like I said, it usually has, might be different on yours if it's been replaced or somebody else has messed with it, but I believe this is the factory style that has a Phillips head on it. So you just got to get that unthreaded and it pops right out. Sometimes if it spins, you can use the pick to kind of hold the bottom portion of it to keep it from spinning, so you can loosen it. And then after that, this fairing should be able to pop out. And it is a little tricky because it kind of has some notches that you almost put it in at an angle and then lay it down go towards the bike. So just be careful. Don't try to force it when you're taking it out, because it does have a little rubber push pin that holds it back there. And then, like I said, up here, it kind of has some pins that hold it in. There you go. Now I'll show you the back side of it so you can kind of see. So it has these little notches, so they kind of go up in at an angle and then it snaps down. And you do want to be careful. These are pretty easy to break. Little alignment pins, just so that you make sure you get it in the right spot. There's a little hole in this upper fairing that it attaches to, but other than that, should kind of pop right out. Shouldn't take too much force. So now that that's out of the way, you can kind of see we really have access to everything that we need to be able to get to in order to change the oil. Let me get the phone off of the stand here. All right, so maybe this will make it a little better. Let me grab a light. Alrighty, so now with that side fairing off, you can see we pretty much have access to everything that we need to get to. I can pretty easily get to the oil filter, and then the drain plug is down here on the bottom. The fairing is kind of notched right there so that you can get to it without taking it off. But like I said, it's a few more bolts to take off, and it just gives you plenty of extra room. You're not fighting anything, and it's pretty straightforward. You have I believe a 10mm nut here, and then 2 more 4mm hex keys, and then just some Phillips head screws, and that should pop right out. And just make note of when you're taking this stuff off, these don't have to go crazy tight, so just go snug. They don't have to be torqued down super hard. It'll just make your life worse if you strip something or struggle to get it off at a later point. There we go. Alrighty, so now you can see with that other fairing piece off, this little metal lower portion that protects the bottom of the motor, just a lot more access. For a few extra bolts, to me, it's worth it just to be able to get a wrench on there or a socket, whatever you need, which you will need to do if you want to do this properly and put the drain plug back to the torque spec. But it just gives you a lot more room, and then also an opportunity to clean these, because a lot of times you can see it's not too bad. I'm pretty good about cleaning the bike, but it'll get some road grime and stuff on there, and I usually take the chance to clean all this while I'm in here. And you can see right here, here's your coolant reservoir, so you can check. This is actually probably touch on the low side, but it's within the range, so we're good. We're not going to worry about it. Also make note, this is your sight glass, so you can see on the sight glass here to the right, there's these little raised portions on the edge of it. That's to let you know the range that the oil needs to be in. The bike's on a side stand right now, so it's going to be reading a touch high because the back end of the bike is up, but I do typically try to go as high as I can within reason, as long as it's still within the limits. Just make sure I don't ever run into any oil starvations. If you're somebody that likes to do wheelies, not saying that's me, but you know, it just kind of is like a little bit of an extra security blanket to make sure that you never starve the engine of oil. But you do want to just make sure it's in between those lines on the sight glass. So we'll double check that when we go to fill it. But now that you've reached this point, pretty straightforward. You just need a drain pan and something to take the oil filter off. Hopefully, if you've done it in the past, this is should be on hand tight, so you should be able to get it off with your hand. And then one other thing that I would make sure to do is go ahead and take your oil cap off on the top. That'll allow air to come through this side so that the oil drains smoothly. Sometimes these can be a little bit of a booger to get off. They'll just get crud on them and they're plastic. You can just take a crescent wrench if you need a little bit of extra leverage, but for the most part, those should only be hand snug. So we'll go ahead and get ready to drain the oil. All right, and once you're down to where it's just kind of slowly dripping, I would go ahead and just clean your drain plug off, install a new crush washer. Most motorcycle dealerships, if you have one around you, should have they sell any Yamahas, they'll have, you know, oil filters, crush washers, all that in stock, and they can look it up by the bike and give you exactly what you need. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to get as much of that as I can to not drip when I start threading this in. We'll go ahead and put our drain plug back in. And we'll let the oil filter drip for just a little bit more. All right, and while that's draining the rest of the way, what I like to do is go ahead and get my oil filter. I'll let you look at the part number right there, but I also will link all of that in the description along with listing all the tools and stuff like that you need. I like to use the Yamaha OEM filters. I know some other people have decent luck with Mobil 1 and K&N and stuff like that, but I just like to stick to the OEM stuff. You know, they spend a lot of time engineering and designing stuff, so figure that's my safest bet. So you can see on this maybe that the O-ring is already pre-lubed, so that's kind of nice. A lot of times if it's not like that, I like to take some fresh oil and just put a little bit on there so that it's not going on dry. One other thing that I like to do that's not completely necessary is go ahead and pre-fill this with some oil so that it's not totally dry when you go to start the bike. Probably doesn't make that big of a difference, but it's just one of those little things that I think helps so that you're not running the bike completely dry and then it has to spend that time while it's running filling up the oil filter and getting it saturated before it circulates throughout the bike. So just something small that I like to do, but probably not 100% necessary. So and it won't take much. Just pour some in there until you kind of see it start to get close to the threads. And since there's a filter element in there, you know, it's going to absorb a lot of that. So I usually take it and kind of turn it around a little bit. And you can see it's already, well, it's probably going to be hard to see, but you can see it's already kind of absorbed most of that oil. So I had that to where there was almost oil coming out all the way up at the threads, and that element has already absorbed all of that oil. So just something small that I like to do when I'm doing these oil changes. All right, well, it seems like the filter element is pretty saturated, so I see some sitting oil down in there. Probably going to be hard for you to see, but we're going to call that good. All right, so now that this is pretty much stopped dripping, we just have a really slow residual amount. The next thing you'll want to do is get some shop rags and some brake clean, and I like to just clean this area off, spray anywhere that oil might have dripped, so that way when you go to start it, you know if you have an oil leak or not. So just try to get it as clean as you can. And the other important part about this is cleaning this mating surface where the O-ring for the oil filter sits. You don't want to have any residual gunk on there or parts of the old one when you take it off. So just making sure that its mating surface is nice and clean and smooth and there's no junk in there. And then your new oil filter is ready to go on. I've already got this kind of pre-soaked with oil. The O-ring is lubed, so we don't have to worry about that. And just go easy when you go to put it on. Shouldn't have to force it. You don't want to cross thread this. That would be a bad day. It should go on very easy. And then just go hand tight. So you might get a turn or so out of it, but just about as tight as you can get with your hand is really all it needs. So I'll just go snug, and I can even kind of feel it bottom out. So you can go by feel. And then that should be good. And then just in case any other oil is dripped, we're just going to spray this whole area down. Get it wiped off. Drop a rag in the pan, perfect. And then you can move your pan out of the way. Now you've drained your oil. Simple as that. Alrighty, the next step before you do anything else is you want to make sure that you torque this drain plug. Now, a torque wrench is something that everybody might not have in their garage, so I will tell you from personal experience on working on cars my entire life, most of the time I don't worry too much about a specific torque spec, especially on cars. Sometimes they can be harder to get to, so I just know how they're supposed to feel when you tighten them down. Most of the time on stuff like this, you're going into aluminum, it does not have to be crazy. So you will feel it snug down. It does not take much. In this case, it's pretty easy to access, and I do happen to have a torque wrench that goes low enough. So this is a 3/8 drive torque wrench that only goes to 100 foot-pounds, and the manual calls for 32 foot-pounds on this. So that is exactly what I'm going to set it to, and it's a 17 millimeter. So we'll go till it clicks. You can hear it click. So we know we got it at 32 foot-pounds. Now all that's left to do is fill up your oil. I believe that the manual calls for 2.75 quarts, so we'll keep an eye on that. And what you'll want to do is make sure to use this sight glass to double check, because you might have a little bit of variance based on, you know, if you have a different filter that holds maybe a little bit more oil. I don't know if that's the case, but generally in my experience from doing this before, it holds almost exactly 2.75 quarts. So you'll need 3 quarts of oil. You've already put some in the filter if you did it like how I do it. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you go to fill it up. And that part is obviously pretty straightforward. I already have my fill plug opened up so that I could let air through for draining it. So we'll go ahead and grab a funnel and we'll fill her up. And just another little tip, when you go to grab a funnel, one thing I always like to check is that there's no debris or any large chunks of crap in there, because you don't want to obviously go to pour your oil in and it flushes that down in your engine. So I always like to take a rag and wipe this out, or even spray some brake clean down it. This is one that I use pretty regularly, so it has some stains and stuff on it, but I've already checked to make sure we don't have any gunk. So that's just another thing that I would make sure that you are aware of when you go to do this. All right, you can probably already see it on here, but on the sight glass, keep in mind the rear end of the bike is up in the air, so it's gonna read higher than it would even when it's at the correct level, when the bike's sitting on the ground and level. But you can see that we're already kind of at the halfway mark, so don't worry about that too much, because oil has to circulate through the system, get this filter completely full, things like that. So the bike calls for 2.75 quarts. So pretty simple. You're going to use obviously 2 full quarts, And then for this, you know, we're using 3/4 of it. So there's 32 ounces in here. So you have your markers right here. So we're gonna end up using 3/4 of this, right? So you should have down pretty much to this 8 mark left in your 3rd quart of oil. So that's what we're gonna go with, and we're gonna see where it lands on the bike and double check it after it runs. So once you start to get close, you can kind of set the bottle on the ground, and you can probably see, this obviously isn't going to be perfectly level, but I'm right at that 8 marker, very close. So that is almost precisely 2.75 quarts. So, and you can see on the sight glass down here, we are over full. Like I said, don't worry about that too much. Bike is elevated in the air, and then also still has to circulate through the system. So after that, I'm gonna go ahead and pull my funnel out, and then I like to make sure my oil fill cap is cleaned off, or at least wiped down. No crud in there. And then we can go ahead and reinstall our fill plug. And then from here, what I like to do before you put anything back together, it's as easy as it's ever gonna be to get to. So while the bike is like this, I like to go ahead and start it, let it run for a second, make sure there's no obvious leaks, let the oil circulate through the system, and then we'll check and see where the oil level is. Once it looks like it's probably good, we'll get the bike off of the stand and get it on the ground, and we'll double check it and see where it landed on the sight glass, and just make sure we don't need to add any or anything like that. Alrighty, well that wraps up the oil change on the Yamaha R7. I hope that you guys found that helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.